Sorry, my glasses are reflective.
Hello, Kingston and Ulster County. This is the KingstonCitizens.org's Roundtable. It's a brand new program that we're happy to bring to you in the midst of a pandemic and using new tools to communicate. This is our first show of what's the process. Where's the process is also not false, but what's the process? Where we're going to be meeting and talking about different issues in the city of Kingston and Ulster County. My name is Rebecca Martin, and I am the director and co-founder of KingstonCitizens.org. And I'm joined with my friends and co-hosts, Dr. Lynn Eckert and Jennifer Schwartz Berky. And we'll just quickly introduce ourselves, and I think just give a brief overview sense of what our goals are. Why are we doing this? And I'll say for myself, I'm first of all really happy to be in such wonderful company with these wonderful women who have so much experience in working in municipal government and county government and understanding the ins and outs of things, and in addition to their own professions. And so there's that, but I'm also really happy to have a chance to talk about these issues in real time and to share insights and to ask more questions and to encourage the community to do the same and to hopefully help more community members to become civically engaged. So that's why I'm here today. Lynn, you want to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about why you're interested in doing a program like this?
So I'll give you the highlights or the lowlights. You could see it either way. So I'm a professor at Marist College and I teach political science. I was an alderwoman for one term and then a member of the Ulster County Legislature for one term. And I think just having a venue to reach out to people and to talk about the local political issues that are vital. Sometimes these meetings go on and you see the same faces, but it really should, we should have a wider reach because these issues really do affect everyone. So this is just another opportunity to talk about what's going on and hopefully to get people involved and at a minimum have them be informed.
Rebecca, you have to unmute yourself.
That's right. All of a sudden you cut out.
Jennifer Schwartz Berky.
So so we're all new to Zoom, and I'm Jennifer Schwartz Berky. I moved to Kingston 16 years ago, and shortly thereafter met Rebecca Martin. I came from a career in planning in international development. In fact, one very interesting experience in Albania with the Carter Center and access to public meetings. But we can talk about that later. But the reason I actually came to Ulster County to work here was because I had worked globally and in ways that felt very disconnected from the local, and I thought that I should follow the mantra of think globally and act locally. And shortly after moving here, I met Rebecca and we began talking about all the things that we felt really needed to happen in a community where it didn't seem like there was a lot of engagement with our aldermen and with our local government. And so now, I guess, more than a decade later, I see Kingston Citizens as having done a very important job raising awareness and increasing the demand for transparency in local government. So I work with local government and I am excited to be part of this. I have helped communities that I work with to set up virtual meetings, and I hope we can talk a little bit about that today and how open meetings law is being used to continue to facilitate public access to meetings even now during this time.
I'm glad that we've chosen that topic today because it's timely. We have no idea for how much longer we're going to be working remotely like this. But I just want to touch upon one thing that you both have mentioned briefly, and it's that we've all pretty much we've met through civics, and we've all worked together pretty intimately on major issues that we've faced in Kingston: Niagara bottling, from a shooting range and gun shop in Midtown Kingston proposal, and of course there's many more issues too. Those are some big ones, and changing laws and working, and through that work we've really been able to very slowly take one step at a time and understand each and every process that is available to us per decision that's being made. And in a project, there could be, you know, dozens of decisions that are being made by our elected and appointed officials, which means that there's a stopping point for civic engagement for each and every decision. That I think is maybe, I mean, it's interesting to me, and it's a long commitment no matter what issue you step into. Why don't you both speak a little bit about that in terms of your experience in Kingston in that manner, in working together on these things, and what we've learned, and it's a big question, but maybe we can just try to talk about how it's changed us and how we think about our community, our city of Kingston, where we live.
Well, I have an example that you were involved with, Rebecca, and I think Lynn might have been involved with in some way too. I forgot to mention in the introduction that I was also a county legislator for one term. And during that time, there was an effort to abolish the use of memorializing resolutions. And Kingston citizens got involved because the very idea of a memorializing resolution, which is used in the Congress, and it's used in city government as well, is to state the intent and touch upon issues that affect people broadly, even if they don't become a specific law, operationally speaking. So we were very concerned there was this effort to sort of quiet the public, and that was really the main reason why Kingston citizens got involved. Didn't that happen to some extent also, or didn't you debate that and then bring that back during your term, Lynn?
We did, and you know, honestly, I remember the debate, but I'm not sure in the end what we decided to do. I think we did vote to bring it back, if I'm not mistaken, but there were some criteria that had to be met if you were to bring a memorializing resolution forward.
Mm-hmm.
And it was fascinating because I think you guys had made several memorializing resolutions at the Ulster County Legislature, and it was in the aftermath of Trump's election. And I really felt like the county Republicans wanted to sort of shut down any kind of message that would make clear where Trump stood on issues, which tended to be a little more to the right than where they often stood on issues. And they were controversial issues. They were issues that divided the electorate, and they wanted it to just go away. You know, they sort of wanted to have their cake and eat it too. We're on the ticket with Trump. Trump swept us into office kind of thing, but at the same time, we're not Trump, right? So, and it seemed to me to be this overreaction, really, to what was a unique historical circumstance. And the idea that you would just simply, and I think at the time, which I thought was a brilliant argument, which you raised, Jenny, and that is that in effect, the Declaration of Independence is a memorializing resolution. Like, you can't get any more American than that.
That was a great op-ed that you wrote, Jenny.
Oh, thank you.
Kingston Times, and I think that what I recall in all of that is that I think it gave us an opportunity to really explain what a memorializing resolution is and what it does and why it's an important tool. I think I remember seeing a lot of new civic engagement at that time new people stepping forward because they understood the threat of getting rid of them and wanted to do whatever they could to help to keep them intact. And they did remove them, but they ended up coming back a few years later, the memorializing, when the Democrats actually, I think, had control of the legislature. I think that was one of the first things that they did, was bring it back. And there might be some restrictions to that. As you say, Lynn, I can't recall, but they might have struck a compromise with that. And Lynn, you've also, as well as serving on the legislature, you've been an alderwoman and chair of Laws and Rules as well, which is one of the committees in the city that's revered as being one of the, one of the most important committees. They're all important, but finance, Laws and Rules tend to really make a lot of decisions and do a lot of legislation work. And you were elected as an alderwoman in Ward 1. There are 9 wards in the city of Kingston. There are 9 alder or council members and 1 council president. So there are 10 members of the council, 9 voting members and 1 council president. And you were instantly thrust into the chair, I think pretty early, of Laws and Rules. So you have that purview too, as well as the county purview, as well as being a professor in political science.
Well, I just wanted to add about the memorializing resolutions. Sometimes it's really important to have government speak out, even if it's symbolic, right, especially at a moment when there's a great deal of unease and tension and concern. And so I've seen the memorializing resolutions used really, really well. I think when Kingston used it to talk about Sanctuary City, which they didn't actually declare Sanctuary City to stop short, that was a really important use of the memorializing resolution to say, you're part of our community. We want you to know that, undocumented immigrants, and we're not going to cooperate with the federal government. That was a really important moment. And I've also seen misuse of memorializing resolutions. So I think it's important to understand, sometimes memorializing resolutions are feel good, and they don't do anything more than make people feel good when there are hard legislative policy options that can indeed make transformative change. I think when there's a difference between memorializing resolution and doing the hard work of policy change, and you go with policy change, right? But when that's not available, then you use the symbolic memorializing resolution. So I've seen it used in 2 ways, and I just wanted to, because I think sometimes it gets used in Kingston in that way. Sometimes it's appropriate. Other times you got to get your nose to the grindstone and do the hard work of creating change, and that's through policies.
Although in some ways they can be used to lead upwards. So for example, if every county in the state passed a memorializing resolution to support something, let's say like the Affordable Care Act, then it could say something to the state assembly and senate, on where the counties stand. So I think it's a.
But in that instance, we don't have the authority or policy mechanisms. In that sense, it's a perfectly appropriate use of a memorializing resolution to all get together and symbolically say, this is what we want.
Right.
Yeah, and I would like to see them used as part of a strategy. I mean, you can have a long-term strategy with a goal to change policies and laws, and memorializing resolutions can be part of that, because I like to use them at times where there's a moment of education and bringing a single message out and getting everybody to understand something. Mm-hmm. But it has to be part of, well, it doesn't have to be in the cases that you're talking about, Jenny, when it's making a statement to send upward. But I do also use them as a tool, as part of a longer term strategy to do something. Mm-hmm. And so I'm glad we have them, and I hope we don't have to be in a position again where we have to defend them.
Well, I mean, I'll just
County
say,
or in Kingston for that matter.
I'll just say, too, that from my perspective, having been chair of Laws and Rules and on the Common Council and then the legislature, it really does matter when the public becomes engaged and they're informed and they're coming to the legislature or to the Common Council to speak out, to tell their elected officials how they feel. And it's particularly powerful if they're engaged, mobilized with a goal and a strategy in mind. I think that's enormously useful. And I would just say that oftentimes in my experience in government, there are so many things, so many issues that you're having to confront and deal with. And sometimes you feel flat-footed. And it's difficult to get a long-range purview and to plan ahead. And groups like Kingston Citizens, who do have a longer-term vision, can be really, really helpful to elected officials in helping us see beyond our feet. And so public engagement in that sense at the local level and at every level of government is enormously important.
Well, I think too, as a community group, we are best when we're in step with our elected officials and appointed officials. I mean, you don't want to. I always prefer to be a part of a team of different people, different, you know, a team of elected, appointed officials and citizenry is a powerful stew. And you know, there are times in this arc where community groups are having to really fight from the outside, and I've also seen the times where we've been, you know, lockstep with council members and really doing some great things together. And that's the goal. You want elected officials to use their position to do great things and to make sure that the laws and policies are up to date. And you need the public input and support in order to do that effectively in general. And that's, you know, a broad statement.
But you want them to represent you.
You do, and they can't do it in a silo, right? It has to be a partnership.
Well, that's the point. Go ahead. I'm sorry, Jenny.
No, I was just going to say that when I was legislator, I thought I was coming in with issues that, you know, I had this background in environment, development, economic development, education, and it got completely turned around when, in fact, at the door, people told me what they wanted. And so the process for me was really not about pursuing my special interests or abilities, but about representing what they wanted and what they needed. So if they were experiencing discrimination, I was bringing that to the floor, and to the committees. If their children were experiencing bullying, if they were afraid of being detained by ICE, those were the things that I was hearing. So as representatives, what people are looking for in the process, at least it's my hope, is that the issues that their representatives are dealing with day to day are being brought into the process. So you were about to say, though, Lynn.
I was just going to say that the point that Rebecca made, I wanted to underline it, and that is that you know, there are relationships with people that you develop when you're in elected office, and sometimes those people who are so instrumental in helping you get nominated and putting you in a position to win, you sometimes end up only having conversations with them, and and if you're, you know, just talking to one another, it can be tremendously problematic. And I think to have the public and organizations like Kingston Citizens come out and remind you that you're not just making a deal with people sitting around the table or the people who in the political party who got you there. You're also trying to represent the public good. And sometimes the public good is at odds with the connected people who got you to where you're going. And so I think Kingston Citizens is constantly kind of a, canary in the coal mine, saying, hey, you guys are talking amongst yourselves. You're not representing us, and you're not doing what's in the public good. You have a very narrow definition of what's in the public good. It needs to be broadened. And so I think Kingston Citizens plays a vital role in situations like that. And the public has to play that role. I think it's okay to be busy and engaged with your daily lives, not be able to go to every single meeting. But when there's an issue that matters, it's just enormously important to have people show up and to tell the representatives what they think.
Right.
But you bring up such an important point in that what I know that we try to do is to explain what's happening to allow more people to participate. And one of the things that's been very difficult to accomplish, not just in Kingston or Ulster County, but it's everywhere, is good infrastructure, good municipal infrastructure that allows ongoing public participation. And I'm not sure why there's been such resistance for that. Here we are now, sort of at the 11th hour, and when you look at the systems that are in place in Kingston for community members to be able to understand what's happening, it still doesn't exist. And it's, as I said, it's a problem everywhere. There's not as much of an emphasis on how do we make sure that everything you need to know, if you need to know something from the simplest of things of when your garbage is picked up to how do you enter into a process that's underway that you've just found out about and you're concerned about and you want to participate. And either way, either item from the mundane to the emergency is very, very difficult to understand and enter into, and which leads us into our topic tonight, which I think is a really good one for now, because it not only are we going to discuss something that's brand new to us, but it does highlight some big gaps, I think, for the city of Kingston in how it communicates its expectations of the community members to figure out how to be involved or how to know what's going on in the midst of a pandemic. And the topic that we thought we would start with tonight, and by the way, thank you for both of your wonderful introductions, your service and your friendship. It's so valued by many, many people, and certainly by me. And I love being your co-host. So we thought tonight we would talk about how community members participate in virtual public meetings in the midst of COVID-19. What's the process? What are the rules? So maybe a good place to begin is what typically are the rules that an elected body has to follow, and what changed on March the 13th? And in terms of the guidance that electeds are following now. I open it up to my pals here.
Well, I'm glad you asked. So actually, if I may, the New York has a very very clear system of rules. It's governed by the Open Meetings Law, and if I may, I could share the website with people in a couple of minutes. But the Open Meetings Law basically says that it lays out the rules for public officers and for how meetings are to be essentially convened and run so that they provide the maximum transparency, public access, the rules on voting, on quorums. And this has all been sort of upended right now as a result of the fact that all the town halls and city halls are closed. So what I would love to do is share with you the screen that shows what the Committee of Open Government is and how, I hope I can do this. Hold on, give me a minute. And how the Committee on Open Government has managed to roll with the executive orders that have suggested ways of working around this. Hold on, let me see if I can do this. It's not happening. Hold on. There we go. Can you see the screen that I'm looking at? Does it say Committee on Open Government? Yes? I can't hear you now.
Yes.
Okay. So the Committee on Open Government, you can see that every single website that the state has, there's always an information about the coronavirus. But then there's the rules about the Committee on Open Government and access to information, freedom of information, and there's the Open Meetings Law. So if you look at the Open Meetings Law, it talks about how these meetings should take place, how public notice should happen, how executive sessions in which the lawmakers can in fact close the doors for very specific reasons, how that should happen, how minutes should be taken and provided, and so on. And what the governor did in March was he issued an executive order that talked about what to do under this crisis as all the town halls and municipalities were closing, and what the suspension of the laws and regulations were. If anyone wants this information, we can post it with the posting of the show afterward. But one of the key,
if you scroll down to the bottom is the key point, right?
Right. The key point
Section 7.
is the Section 7. Okay. So there, under public officers law, as we talked about, the law allowing the attendance of meetings.
Article 7, sorry.
Article 7, allowing the attendance of meetings telephonically or through some other similar service. So in the communities that I'm working with, what we have done is we've used Zoom, but other communities are using different things. And if you go to their website, they're required to post the location of the meeting and a link to them. And either some communities have been doing it just by telephone. Others have been making the Zoom meetings actually accessible to the public live. And then they have been required to post a transcript or the video online within a certain undefined but relatively reasonable period of time after the meeting takes place.
Lynn and Jenny, one thing I've noticed is that municipalities are doing it all differently. Like you just said, they're offering a phone number, they're offering a link to Zoom, and the executive order does not require a video, right? It doesn't require a video conference. It's a conference call number or a similar service to participate, which I think is good, because since communities are doing it all different, I've noticed that some community members are confused by that. Mm-hmm. And they're some community members want to be on camera, some don't mind, but because municipalities are doing it all different, it's creating confusion. Are you noticing that so much, or have you heard that as well? Are you
asking me or Lynn?
Both, all of us.
Well, I was going to say, what I was going to say is that the purpose of the Open Meetings Law is for the public to be able to listen and observe what their lawmakers are doing, not necessarily comment. And in one of the communities I'm working with, there were members of the public who got active in the chat room and then wanted their comments to be heard. But unless there's a public hearing or public comment, that is not necessarily allowed. So I think that the executive order does a good job at least making it very clear that they are allowed to continue to listen and, if possible, observe. And then also to make that transcript available or video available requires that at least there's this openness about what was conducted during those meetings. So, I mean, I think considering it's a crisis, I think they're doing the best they can. Every community has a different level of capacity in its ability to pull this off. That's part of it. Some governments are very small.
Well, I mean, the other thing I was going to say too is, there's a great disparity in many communities between those who have the ability to get on Zoom and access the meeting and even view it, let alone participate. So that's a constant, concern as well, because you want, but I mean, the same could be said for the actual meeting itself if it were on the ground. Some people can attend, some people have work, some people have families that they're dealing with at that hour. So there's always a question of accessibility, but it seems to be more pronounced at this moment where many of us are at home and can tune in, via technology, but there's an affordability issue. I just wanted to raise that.
What do you both think about the public access route for things? That used to be, Kingston used to have a public access television station, and I know that, beyond the little specialty shows that community members would host, there were opportunities to play public meetings. And I know that, different parts of our community, the elders, and I don't know, others who may not be able to go to meetings or may not know how to access, new technology at any given time. But that seemed to be a good tool, but that doesn't really exist in many communities anymore. I know Sopus has a public access program, but I don't know of any others really. There might be.
They have it up in Shandaken as well. I don't know. I mean, I've just been to several communities in Ulster County where, in fact, they are televising it live, and they were, at least they were for a long time. I don't know the answer to that. I think sometimes it can be an added expense for a community, but considering these video conferencing technologies that are available now, it seems like it would really lower the expense for communities to make these available now.
Can we pull up the City of Kingston's website, Jennifer? And
Sure.
for a minute, just to kind of bring this closer to home.
Mm-hmm. Hold on a second. There we go. Okay, so here's the City of Kingston's website. And this is the homepage. If you go to kingston-ny.gov, and as we were looking at a little bit earlier, right at below the sort of current news, there's a list of all the upcoming virtual meetings. So what did you want me to look at? Want me to open the...
You can pull up the Kingston Common Council agenda. So what Kingston is doing is they're using GoToMeeting or GoToWebinar, GoToMeeting, I presume. Mm-hmm. And in the agenda, when you click on the agenda, you need to scroll to the bottom where you can see the virtual meeting information, which is a phone number. So in the City of Kingston, they are providing the public the opportunity to participate through calling in. Though and you can't see them, but they are virtual, they are video. So the council's video, the public is calling. What I would also like to highlight, Jenny, if you go back to the
web page. Okay, hold on.
To the web page.
Mm-hmm.
If you go down to past meetings, I got to do something.
Archived agendas?
Right below. Yeah. Or actually, sure, you could do that. Archived agendas. This is where it gets kind of tricky because you could click on any one of these agendas.
Okay. Let's see. Do you want to go to the ZBA or
anyone that wasn't?
Fine, let's go to the planning board.
So what the public needs to know is that in the old agendas, you see they're posting a link
right
here, and the link that's posted is the link of the meeting. So if you are to click on that or copy and paste it, it takes you to the City of Kingston's YouTube page where you can actually watch the video. This is what the appointed officials in this case saw while you were calling in to the meeting.
Right.
So the City of Kingston does have a YouTube channel, and
hold on.
The meetings are all up there. But if you're looking for something specific, I guess you have two choices. You can go to the City of Kingston's YouTube channel. So if you scroll down here,
Mhm.
you can go back to, can you go back to that video?
To YouTube. So everybody can see what I watch on YouTube. Yes.
Oh,
Okay.
go scroll down and click on City of Kingston.
Okay.
City of
Hold on.
Kingston here.
Okay. Yeah,
Oh,
there we
there
go. And you can
City of
subscribe.
Kingston. You can
Yes.
subscribe. Click on City of Kingston here. Yeah, click on that. And then scroll, and you can see their videos. They have a list of their
Oh,
videos.
excellent. That is really great.
That's good to
Wow.
know. Scroll down so you can see all of the remote meetings are here. So you can look at them up by dates, or you can have the choice to go back to the agendas, which is not an efficient way, you know, for the public to engage. You're not gonna, there's not good direction here on how to find this stuff. And it's so important. And I have to also give kudos to the council for doing a really good job getting this up to speed. I know that the council president was deeply involved in creating the framework for this, working with the City of Kingston's IT department, and they did great. And I think that that format has been used across the board for council, for committee meetings, for whatever it is that we're watching. So they did really well very quickly, and we thank them.
So just a
We
little
thank the
tip
city
to
for
the
that.
public. Right. So just a little tip to the public. If they did want to, for example, find a meeting, they could search in, you know, in the search bar if they wanted to find the planning meetings.
Right.
And so on. So, well,
so it's good to bookmark this. It's good to bookmark this, and it's also important. You know, prior to COVID, not all meetings were being filmed. Some meetings are being filmed. Council, maybe caucus, I don't know. We'd have to see. Not all committee meetings. And this is something we've been advocating for so long that I've forgotten how long. And in fact, we've been filming meetings of interest for over a decade. And we really need to rely on our municipality to do that. And it's, whatever the expense is, it's like anything else, it's infrastructure. And I would like for everyone to think about it in that way. It's an investment in civic engagement. And it's also a way for there to be, you know, good checks and balances across the board. And, you know, there's nothing wrong with that, unless you're trying to do something funny. So, I mean, that should just be an obvious rule of thumb, don't you think?
Well, yeah, and I'm wondering what would prevent the Common Council or any community from continuing to use some basic form of video technology to continue doing this after the crisis is over. What do you guys think?
I mean, I think it's just in general a good idea to have transparency, and I think it protects everyone in the end. If you've been transparent and you've followed the appropriate procedure, I think what happens a lot of times is, in my experience, and again, this is anecdotal, but I think there's evidence of this in terms of research as well, is that there's a there's a tension, a natural tension between the executive and the legislature. And the executive tends to have a plan. It's well thought out, and it's expedient and efficient. But that's not the nature of the legislature. The nature of the legislature is to take that plan and to talk about it and to modify it and to hear from constituents and to hear from interested groups. And then it's about building a consensus around whatever modifications that you've made. And that consensus takes a long time, and it's a lot of hard work. And I think executives want to avoid it. They know best, and they don't want the modifications. And the more transparent you are, the longer it's going to take to go through this process and build consensus. But that's how our system of government works. The consensus is hard won and sometimes hard fought. But in the end, the decision is more credible and more legitimate because it's gone through this process and you have lots of different people buying into it. So it's not, our system of government, even at the local level where there's an executive and the legislative branch, it's not efficient. And so to me, one way to ensure, an expedient decision is just to kind of, get this thing through, not necessarily be entirely transparent, maybe make the public, and it's not even necessarily a conscious decision, I think, on occasion, but if you can make a decision and avoid the controversy, I think sometimes that's the preference.
One of the things that I've noticed is what is the most efficient is when you start with everybody you need to at the table. That's the most efficient way to get anything done. That you may have a great idea, but I know that when I'm sitting around the table with different people, every issue brings different people to the table. Where I begin and where I end is totally different, and it's way better. And it's not because I don't need to have all of the solutions, and I don't need to know everything there is to know about a subject, but I do need to make sure that I have those resources to me so that we can come to some even starting point that's going to be more representative of an idea, and be open and allow it to evolve through discussion and debate, and learning about others who also need to be at the table. You don't always know who everyone is. You can map things out as best as you can, but it's not easy in a community. It's a small city, but it's a lot going on, and the county too. So it's a process also, and that's what time allows you to do, is to be able to identify those all of as many of the people who need to be at the table, and then there's consensus for the most part, and I think a better understanding of, in the end, why what has happened the way it did.
Actually, the history of planning parallels the opening up of grassroots engagement and involvement. Planning used to be very much of a sort of autocratic, kind of engineering exercise. And as communities began pushing for more and more openness, with, for example, 1968 and protests and all these movements to really raise consciousness, let's just say, in general sense, has brought planning into a place where now you have to do a stakeholder analysis for every single plan you do, and engage every single group and every single representative, at least, of those groups to the table. And when I came to the legislature, I found that wasn't necessarily the way policy was being made. But you would think that policy and planning, they're very similar. You should really bring the groups that are most affected to the table, or all the groups that could be affected to the table. But what I've noticed, at least in the limited experience I've had in local, state, county government, is that the image of the imperial president or the imperial executive, which has also followed at the same time an upward trend, as we're noticing. It's very interesting that as the country has opened and there's been more grassroots engagement, social media, and just public awareness of politics, that the executive has become ever stronger, almost as a push me, pull you tug of war between the sort of public voice and the expedient executive. Lynn, I was wondering if you had some thoughts about that, because you're the scholar of this.
Well, it's interesting because as you're talking about this, you can't help but think of gender. The imperial presidency, that sort of model, the imperial executive, if you want to apply it to the imperial mayor, that tends to be a more kind of male-oriented way to lead. And we have that sort of expectation that men will lead in that way, and female leaders tend to be more open to hearing from various stakeholders. And I think I don't want to underestimate how difficult it is to manage a process where consensus is at the center. Because there are times when you won't reach consensus. There are times when, as you're approaching all these various stakeholders, you can go off track and you can really find yourself going down a rabbit hole in terms of policy interventions. So there's an art to it. You know, I don't mean to suggest otherwise. There's a time to get input, there's a time to build consensus, and there's a time to recognize that there are differences of opinion that aren't going to go away. And you have to foreclose the process and make a decision at times. And I think the times that probably more on the Common Council than in the case of the legislature, the times where I think mistakes were made, what comes to mind is that there was this sense that we had a policy goal and we were going to get there no matter what. And I think that's probably the wrong way to lead. And it creates a lot of dissension. It uses a lot of political capital unnecessarily. And I think you have to be careful about it. So, you know, right now, someone like Cuomo, during the pandemic, everyone is, you know, very happy with him. He's the ideal leader. He comes out, he tells you what's going on, he's forthright, he's honest, and he's also very commanding. And I think there's a time for that kind of leadership, but you know, in most of the decisions we make at the local level, no one has a 360 view. You know, no one has a God's eye view from nowhere. And it helps to hear from different stakeholders and to be humble enough to listen and to think that there may be something that they're telling you that's important. And
also this idea of a legacy, right, Lynn? It's like when you talk about humility and leadership, I like to think of it as stewardship rather than leadership. And that you hear this a lot, like my legacy, my administration, my. And those are some of the cues that, you know, and it's okay to start there. The goal is when you're in a position like that you're learning how to be better at you know, building enthusiasm for the community and taking advantage of the incredible talent that's in the community. They're everywhere, etc. And so I'm not really sure how that all gets broken down because it's such a personal journey. But I think that good policy and laws protect us from someone's intimate journey with stewardship. You know, I don't necessarily want to go through someone's personal journey of learning how to lead a community who you know, in the face of poorly written laws and outdated laws and policy that doesn't protect us as it needs to. And I think, you know, to just sort of wrap up this topic, what can we ask? What small steps today, based on what we've just experienced here and looking at the website, what are some good steps for newly engaged community members, people who've just moved here, people who are home and starting to pay attention a little or closer attention to the city of Kingston government, and also those who are savvy, who might not have even known that the city has a YouTube channel, right? So what small steps can we offer today to help community members participate in meetings in the midst of COVID? It's just sort of a rollback of what we've seen, right? One is to visit the City of Kingston's website, and we can provide these links and information in the body of our first roundtable, and to locate the information that they need to participate, which we know now is a conference call number, and to circle back the next day and to, if you'd like, and to review the meeting that just took place. And also notice on the agenda that there are legislative packets that actually, sometimes the agendas are really bad at outlining what the discussion's actually going to be. And so you have to click on the legislative packet that's next to the agenda as a link that can show you
Right.
what the items are that that the elected or appointed official will be discussing. And it's not simple, is it? Really?
Oh, no.
Yeah.
You know, and I think there are hurdles too. If you have, you know, Jenny is an urban planner and has a great deal of knowledge and comfort level with, you know, making her way through these agendas, knowing what these issues are, having this background in state law and environmental law, a whole range of different issues. You can imagine how overwhelming it would be if you don't have that background stepping into this arena. And even for me, when I started out, I didn't attend Common Council meetings, and maybe attended one or two. And so it can be, you know, an arcane and curious and difficult process to grasp and get a hold of. But it's possible, and you don't need a PhD to do it. And I think that is something I want to convey. Anybody can do it. And you can take little steps along the way to slowly become comfortable. And what I would want to say is, I think it's really important too for people who have just moved here, for people who have been here their entire lives, whomever, that they not only pay attention to local government and at their own pace become familiar with it, but also to think about running for office. And I did a short tour of duty. Jenny did a short tour of duty, and I think it's incumbent upon all of us to step into the ring. We have people who've been in office for decades, and it's not good. That's not appropriate. That's not how these offices were designed. And so it'd be great if people came in, stepped up to the plate, served for a term or two, and then turned it over to someone else. I think it's really, we're not trying to elect people for lifetimes here. And if I could get people to take a gentle step toward becoming informed, and then a larger step as they felt more comfortable to picking up the torch. It's an obligation of citizenship, and it's a lot easier to participate at the local level. And you know, those are high, lofty ideals, but I think everyone should take a turn. And in doing that, you have a greater understanding of the pressures that elected officials face, because it's a difficult position to be in. It's not, you know, it's not like you're going to parades and waving and get nice seats somewhere. You're making difficult decisions where people are, you're just redistributing resources in some instances, and there are winners and losers, and people get upset, and rightly so. So I think all the way around, it would make for a more civil community in which we're more forgiving when people in office make mistakes, but at the same time hold them accountable when there's something more, you know, nefarious going on, and they're not standing up for the public good, and they're engaged in petty or vindictive behavior, that kind of thing.
I'm so glad we're recording this, because that was so beautifully put.
Oh,
so many great things. And just to unpack it a little, and also to say that many of the ideas that you just presented are actually great previews for some of the things we'd like to do in a structured fashion in upcoming presentations. One being, how do you get involved at a higher level? How do you get, I don't want to say a higher level, at a more engaged level? And if you look at the ladder of participation, which we talk about a lot in planning, instead of just being spoken to, if you can actually get involved in some way, my suggestion would be not only to attend a meeting, but prepare testimony about something that is important to you. And if you're not comfortable with doing that, although we'll talk about that in a future show, right, Rebecca?
Absolutely.
Another thing that we talked about was maybe writing a letter to the editor about something that interests you. At least attending a public meeting, though, and learning how that works is really the sort of gateway into the process. And I have noticed when I taught civics a few years ago with Zephyr Teach Out, the idea of having people prepare testimony and speak, even just for 2 minutes, got so many people involved in the process. They are now running for office. They're sitting on various boards and commissions. It's amazing to see what happens when someone bears witness, which is something that James Baldwin talked a lot about, and which I think is so critical to our democracy. But another thing that we talked about was learning how to ask a good question. And we're going to talk about that in a future show as well. Right, Rebecca?
Absolutely. And I think that now is the best time for community members to witness a meeting, because they're all being recorded. And not only that, you get to see your elected officials' faces and their conversations, their body language. All of this stuff is so important. Excuse me, and to get to know. And now you can do it from home. And so it's a good starting point for people who are new to this to watch all these meetings. You have plenty of time, and see how your elected and appointed officials are talking about really important things, in your community. And while we are looking out at the national or engaging in national dialogue, and all of those things are really important, but everything is happening under our noses right at home. And so I think, and it's empowering too, because, we've always joked about this, that you're not going to run into Trump or Obama at Monkey Joe's, but you will definitely see Mayor Steve Noble or President Andrea Schott somewhere in town. And that's really something. You have access to people who are representing you, and someday it could be you. So on that note, thank you so much to, these headphones are terrible, to my dear friends and co-hosts. I'm Rebecca Martin.
I'm Jennifer Schwartz Berky.
I'm Lynn Eckert.
And we will see you next week. Thanks for tuning in.